Hey everyone, I'm here with some modern action. I really wanted to wait to play with Bedlam Reveler until Spirebluff Canal came out, but here we are. I couldn't really wait. I was looking for sweet modern decks, and I found this thing played by Holy Diver. He's 5-0'd 3 modern leagues, I believe, maybe 4 that went up, and another person also took his deck and 5-0'd a league with it as well, and that's only for the leagues that got posted, so... for all we know, could actually just be killing it with this deck. So, looks pretty sweet. We have the Bedlam Revelers. I was trying to use this in more of a Grixis control shell. I think most people have been a little bit more successful playing this in just like a blue-red, maybe like Delvery Monastery Swiss Spear shell. And this one incorporates Kiln Fiend and Temur Battle Rage along with a bunch of cheap stuff. Mutagenic Growth and Gataxian Probe are about as cheap as it gets because they basically cost 0. So, this deck is kind of combo-y, kind of like Suicide Zoo, kind of like some of the Death Shadow decks I was working on a little bit ago. And yeah, this deck looks pretty sweet. So, it is basically just a bunch of cantrips. You have some Serum Vision, some Sleight of Hands, a pretty nice, tight blue-red mana base, light black splash for some sideboard stuff. Faithless Looting, which is a card that I think works really well with Bedlam Reveler. Why is it so hard to say that card? I don't know. I just think about the card. I don't talk about it very often. But yeah, Faithless Looting works really well because Bedlam Reveler, we did it, it's really weird. It constrains, like, you know, how you have to build your deck and stuff like that. So, low land count, basically not any reactive spells. There are, you know, some combo pieces, Temur Battle Rages and whatnot, but there are no counter spells in this list, nothing like that. But the issue that I found was that if my opponents... from playing Grixis at least, if my opponent wasn't like playing into my game plan, which was like, you know, playing stuff that I could counter, playing stuff that I would kill, I would just amass this giant hand and not be able to play my Revelers. So this deck is very proactive in that it gets to play to the board, play out a bunch of different creatures like Kiln Fiend, Swiss Spear, Thing in the Ice, whatever. And once you're, you know, you have your Bedlam Reveler turned on, then you can basically just cash it in for some new cards and keep going. But Faithless Looting helps in that, like, if you draw too many Bedlam Revelers, or you don't have enough instants or sorceries in your graveyard, or you draw too many creatures, or whatever. And, yeah, Looting just kind of, like, fixes your hand, sort of brainstorm style, but also helps the Reveler because you can just deposit instants and sorceries into your graveyard. But, it seems weird because it's, you know, it's card disadvantage. We're not really doing anything with our graveyard except, like, reducing the cost of our Bedlam Reveler. So Faithless Looting on its own is just not a good card, but I think it is a great enabler for decks with Bedlam Reveler. I also just feel like, you know, it helps you make your land drops. It makes everything feel more smooth, and also you don't really care about the card disadvantage because A, you're basically just trying to kill your opponent. You don't care like how many cards you have. You're not necessarily trading resources with your opponent, so you're more so looking for very specific things and trying to do specific things on specific turns. Just use your mana every turn, actually like play out threats and find a window to battle rage your opponent to death. And I think Looting helps with that a lot. Obviously there are going to be games where you mulligan and you're super light on resources and Looting is just like the worst thing ever. But I think the fact that you have Bedlam Reveler means that Looting is just not that bad because you have Reveler to refuel. And even if you hit a bunch of like lands off Bedlam Reveler, you still have Faithless Looting to like sift through those and give you more action and maybe find you another Reveler to just keep going with the chain. So I do like 2 Lootings. I think it just kind of like ties the room together, you know. But yeah, you might look at it and just be like, oh, this is just a bad card. I don't want to play with this. But I think you might be wrong. So we'll see. Deck is kind of weird. 3 Lightning Bolts. Holy Diver started with 4 and then reduced it to 3. I imagine that was because it's basically just like a card that you want to draw one of. Like, yeah, there are certainly matchups like Infect, Affinity, whatever, where if you just draw a bunch of bolts, that's great. But there are definitely matchups where it's just like, this is Lava Spike, and that is not very good. So I think you just want to have 1 copy per game that you draw, and yeah, you know, you just don't want to like flood on Lightning Bolts too much. 2 Swiss Spears is a very strange number. I'm like kind of offended by this, honestly, but it does make sense because Kiln Fiend and Reveler are kind of like the backbone of the deck, and Thing in the Ice plays a pretty big role too, where like this is your interaction. You have a threat and interaction all tied up in 1 card. And Swiss Spear is just kind of like a concession to like, look, we need more threats. This thing kind of softens them up. Maybe it draws a Lightning Bolt, which then kind of like clears the way for your Kiln Fiend or clears the way for your Reveler. And I do like that because like this deck also just can't afford to play a bunch of creatures, and it could be that the designer of the deck was like, okay, I want Thing in the Ice, I want Kiln Fiend, I want Reveler, but I also need more things, like more creatures. So Swiftspear just kind of gets the nod where it's just this cheap threat. It's probably not going to kill anyone on its own. It is very rare that you're going to be able to Battle Rage this for lethal, unlike the other 3 creatures in the deck. But like I said, softens them up, maybe draws removal spell, could block, you know. Just puts a little pressure on them, you know? And I think that's fine. I think that's a fine 2 of. Mutagenic Growth is great. Saves your Kiln Fiends from lightning bolts. Just pound for pound, like one of the best cards in Modern, I think, if you are trying to do something like this. Like, this card, especially with Temur Battle Rage, is just so good, so powerful. Manamorphose is kind of like this wild card. Like, I'm not really sure if it should be in the deck, but it is effectively a free cantrip that fills the graveyard for Reveler, triggers Kiln Fiend, triggers Thing in the Ice. I don't like that you need to really start your turn with this and not know what's going to happen. It is certainly not great for just that aspect of it, but, you know, you could play things like, you know, more sleight of hands, but realistically, like, your mana is going to be taxed, especially on your combo turns. Like, if you don't have 4 mana, if you have Kiln Fiend and a Battle Rage, like, what you're going to want are free spells, not 1 mana spells, because you can only cast one mana spell, and I feel like we're going to be able to do that the way that this deck is built. So having an extra free spell, you know, there's a lot of merit to it. Manamorphose is kind of like Faithless Looting. It's just like, I look at this and I'm like, oh, I'm not excited about playing with this card, but I think it serves its purpose. And, you know, we have things like Prowess, we have Kiln Fiend, we have Thing in the Ice, so just like having a free spell effectively is probably good. There are also corner cases where, you know, you cast your black sideboard cards off this, or you play Apostle's Blessing for mana and not have to take damage and stuff, so that's kind of cool too. Bedlam Reveler, this is it. This is the thing. This is the hotness. This gives your deck a way to refuel, which I think is great. There are matchups like Jund's, you know, decks that are just pretty grindy, where you're going to need that because you're going to need to fight through all their removal, and that's what they're trying to do against decks like these, is just kill all your stuff and beat you down and whatnot. And Reveler is just like, no, like, I'm going to make this really hard for you because I'm just always going to be gassed up all the time, and it's going to be really hard for you to actually come back. Like, you're going to need to kill me with Tarmogoyf or, like, lock me down in Liliana the Veil or something, because Reveler is going to stop you from doing all that other stuff. So, Reveler is really nice. It adds an entirely new dimension to decks like these. Without Reveler, they would just not have something like this. So, Reveler's huge. It's also just like a great threat. It doesn't die to bolt. It has prowess. Like, I think Battle Rage with it is probably going to be pretty close to lethal. It's not quite Kiln Fiend power or whatever, but Reveler is big. It battles with Tarmogoyf. Like, this card is phenomenal, and it is the card that I most look forward to building with, especially once Spiral Bluff Canal comes out. So, this is where we start, I guess. And then Miser's Blood Moon, which I kind of like. I think this is dope. There are Seer Vision, Sleight of Hand, some probes. And Blood Moon is just like this hammer against a lot of decks, and there are more in the sideboard, but like playing 1 main deck is kind of free, because if you draw 1, it's not that big of a deal. There are going to be spots where you're just like never going to really be interested in casting it, and you're probably going to like Bedlam Reveler it away, but that's fine. Blood Moon, very, very powerful card. Definitely belongs in a deck like this, because, you know, you have fetches and a bunch of islands and whatnot, and you're probably going to want this in your sideboard, so Modern's in a spot where Blood Moon is just a killer against most of decks. So, 1 Blood Moon main deck in a deck with a bunch of cantrips makes a lot of sense to me. Like I said, 2 more on the board. A couple of Young Pyromancers, just a little bit more threat density. I wonder if there's a matchup where you just need blockers on the ground. Maybe something like Zoo, where this could actually be pretty good. Help you stabilize, get you some time, get you to combo. We have a Shattering Spree. I kind of like more of these because it seems like there's just a lot of affinity, especially on Magic Online. I think Shattering Spree is better than things like Vandal Blast or Hurkyl's Recall, what have you. Just seems like way more powerful than anything else. I imagine that most of the time you're going to be doing this for 3, and there are 3 islands, but Manamorphose kind of helps with that, so that's pretty sweet. A couple Death Shadows, kind of like Young Pyromancer, just there for threat density, I think. I feel like there are matchups like Jund where you probably go down on Battle Rages and maybe down on Kiln Fiends and up on just real threats like Death Shadow and Young Pyromancer. So that's probably a thing. Vampiric Link, Concession to Burn. Feel like that matchup could certainly be pretty problematic. Like, Eidolon is just a huge issue. It is certainly something that, you can take out with a bolt or whatever, but if they land it and you don't have an answer, you're basically dead because you're going to take way too much damage. So Vampiric Link makes a lot of sense. Link and Death Shadow, I imagine, are probably both a package for burn, but Death Shadow helps against Jund too, and that's why the black is in the deck now. The black was not in the initial list from what I saw, but it's a pretty neat piece of technology here. A couple Swan Songs. I'm curious about this one because I feel like this could just be Dispel or Spell Pierce or something. I feel like this is for burn and for Eidolon specifically. That is just kind of my inkling there because, counter target enchantment is pretty nice against them, and it's a way to stop the most problematic card against you. So I feel like this makes a lot of sense. I've played decks, not necessarily like this, but other decks with Swan Song, things like Sneak and Show in Legacy, and the 2/2 just beats you down sometimes, and it's like a pretty bad moment when you actually just like end up losing to this 2/2 that dealt you 10 damage or whatever, but I feel like if this card is there specifically for Eidolon, then that makes a lot of sense to me. Twisted Image, Spellskite, pretty big issue. I could see another copy. Shattering Spree is kind of another answer, but it's not a great one because Shattering Spree doesn't help you against Inkmoth Nexus. So, it's pretty, like, Shattering Spree is pretty narrow to bring it against something like Infect. I feel like a Twisted Image is probably fine, but I would kind of be happier with, like, Dismember or another Twisted Image or something. I'm not sure if these Vapor Snags actually help against Spellskite. I feel like, you're going to need a lot of resources, and Vapor Snag is, I don't know. It's only good if you're comboing them on one turn, but it is not good if you need to like actually just remove the thing and play like this kind of longer game. But I imagine Snag is just there for bigger creatures like Tarmogoyf. Another Apostle's Blessing, protect your thing from removal. And yeah, I have no idea how to sideboard with this deck. I've played with decks like these in the past, and it's not super intuitive, and we're gonna kind of figure out things as we go. But that's it. Let's do some battling.